Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Vegan Women Leaders. I'm your host, Katrina Fox. My guest today is Trish Ahjel Roberts. Now, Trish is an acclaimed author, self-actualization coach, and professional speaker. Now, despite having worked in the World Trade Center on 9/11, the day after her birthday, a history of childhood sexual assault, institutional racism, domestic violence, divorce, and single parenting, Trish is a happiness expert. Born and raised in Brooklyn, she's a certified life coach, yoga and meditation instructor, and Reiki practitioner. She's the founder of Mind-Blowing Happiness and Black Vegan Life, and the author of 3 self-help books. The most recent is 12 Steps to Mind-Blowing Happiness. Trish, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Katrina. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, wonderful. Well, first of all, I love the title of your books and your project, Mind-Blowing Happiness, and we will be getting into that. But first of all, I just want to, because obviously you've had quite the journey, overcome quite a lot of adversity. So can you tell us briefly a little bit about your life growing up, and as much as you're comfortable sharing, of course, the impact that the childhood sexual assault had on you?
So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in a very nice Caribbean family, mom, dad, grandmother, so multi-generational. And when I was young, I was assaulted. I was 8 years old. And I have to say that it changed the trajectory of my life, as I think all trauma does, and particularly, sexual violence. So I was always a smart kid, went on to a prestigious math and science high school. But by the time I started working through my trauma, I was really one of those kids who was wearing black all the time and smoking in the bathroom. So that was kind of my high school experience. And, later on, moved out on my own, got my master's degree, started working, and later, thankfully, found therapy and books that were healing books. And along the way, stumbled into Buddhism and meditation and yoga and Reiki, energy healing, all these amazing healing modalities, and have been delighted to be able to share those with people.
I love that. Now, you also mentioned in your bio, you've experienced institutional racism and domestic violence. So again, can you talk to us just a little bit, as much as you're comfortable sharing, a little bit about that before we go into some of the tools and the steps that you teach? I just want to give people a picture of, where you've kind of come from in terms of your life experiences.
The hard stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I think that it's not uncommon, if you've grown up with trauma, to find yourself attracted to other people who've also experienced trauma. So you actually end up bonding with people over your experience of trauma. And that's what happened to me. I got married really young to someone who I thought was really wonderful, and that's how we bonded. But because he was unhealed, he acted out in a violent way. So it was a short marriage. I ended up moving with no forwarding address, so that was how that happened. The institutional racism, was something that I know that I'm a Black woman in the United States. I realized that. But once I got my education, I have to admit, Katrina, I wasn't entirely prepared for what I experienced, and I really didn't understand what was happening while it was happening to me. So when I was about 25 years old, I went to work for a major telecom firm. They had a diversity hiring initiative, and they hired, a number of people of color. And a few years later, they kind of systematically let all of us go or pushed us out of the job. So that was kind of my first real tangible experience with that. And then many years later, and I write about this in my self-help memoir, I was a party to 2 class action lawsuits at financial services firms that I worked for. One was based on race, one was based on race and gender. And so that was all, that's a kind of a different kind of trauma than what I experienced earlier. But I think through all of those experiences, if you don't develop resilience and spirituality, then you're really missing an opportunity. So
For sure. And then finally, you mentioned you were working in the World Trade Center on 9/11.
Yeah.
What was that? That must have been like talk about the trauma, like different types of trauma. Like how did that impact you? What happened, and like how did that impact you? Were you one of the people who got out, or what happened there?
Yeah, so the World Trade Center, I had been working there for about 5 years when the towers fell. I worked in two World Trade Center. Thankfully, I was not in the building that morning. So it was
Okay.
something, I saw it on TV and I was heading into Manhattan. And then, obviously I never went into Manhattan that day. So thankfully that one I kind of skated by a little bit. I did lose a couple of friends in the trade centers, but gratefully it didn't impact me personally.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh. Wow. So I guess with everything that's going on in the world, like, we talked about, mentioned some of those issues, the institutionalized racism, sexism, all the horrible exploitation that happens with people, terrible cruelty to animals and the planet, devastation of the planet. So, and also a lot of division going on now with people, arguing and, relationships fracturing over politics,
Yeah.
etc. It's kind of, I'm just curious, how is it possible to be mind-blowingly happy with all that going on? Do you know what I mean? Like, you would think it would be easy to be mind-blowingly sad or angry or depressed. So talk us through a little bit about that. And at what point did you, in your own life, I guess, as well, discover that mind-blowing happiness? Was it in spite of what you went through, the traumas, or did it kind of come later?
You know what? I find that you can find your way into inertia, whether things are going really well or going really poorly for you. So sometimes when we think things are going fine, then we feel like, well, we don't have to do anything. And sometimes when things are going really poorly, it's almost like you're driving while watching the hood ornament, like you can't pay attention to anything else. So it can happen either way. But for me, I think because I was going through a lot of traumatic experiences, I was looking for healing, and when I tapped into yoga, when I tapped into Buddhism, when I learned meditation, I was beginning to learn all of these lessons and ultimately had the opportunity to share them. Yeah.
Wow. So, but how do people, so if people are, like you say, we're looking at all these atrocities that are going on in the world, and it can be very easy, as I say, to be sad or to be angry. So how can people, and also I think a lot of, I guess, activists might feel guilty almost, like, there's all this terrible thing. How can I be off here happy and enjoying myself? Can you speak to that a little bit?
I almost feel like this idea of self-actualization is the solution to world problems. Sometimes I joke and say I'm only trying to save the world, right? Because in a self-actualized world, right, where people feel fulfilled and joyful, they have passion, they have purpose, that's not the kind of world where you're going to have senseless violence, you know? And the reality is it sounds sometimes a little out there, but everything starts with one person. So just like veganism, if one person stops, committing these acts of violence and atrocities against animals, and then another one does, and then another one then it becomes a movement. So in the same way, I would like to see this mind-blowing happiness movement expand, not just to benefit animals, but to benefit all of us. The earth is being damaged. Like, you were talking about with politics and racism and violence, we're damaging each other. And we would not be damaging each other if we could find our own personal fulfillment and purpose and joy. So that's where it comes from.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So for example, I know you've said that there's like a misconception that you can only, happiness depends on your situation. And then if your situation changes, then suddenly you're not happy. But I think you believe that you must find joy in any moment. So how can you find joy in something where perhaps you are going through a trauma, or you are going through, or something's happened, you've lost your job, or you're in a job that you hate, for example? How can you find happiness in those moments where, life really isn't going well for you?
Your way, yeah. So there's actually studies around that. So 40% of your happiness is actually what you're born with. So it's in your genes.
Oh,
And
really? Wow.
well,
I
you
did not know that.
babies,
That's
you cranky
interesting.
babies, right? 40% is kind of your genetic set point. Only 20% has to do with your situation. And we've all kind of experienced that a little bit. Like, you get the promotion that you want, and then 3 months later, you're kind of like back to your whatever. It doesn't feel that exciting anymore. Or you get married, and then the honeymoon phase passes. Or you get a new car, whatever the new toy is. So that's basically the 20% that's situational. And then the other 40% are things that you can really change, like learning to meditate or learning to live in gratitude, things that make you feel happier no matter what's going on in your life. And we've always heard situations with, I don't know, like a monk or somebody who lives a very simple life who can be very full of joy versus people who are very wealthy and very miserable. So
that's true. That's true. So let's talk about how, well, we'll go into some of the steps. First of all, I know one of the questions we talk about is how can we stop anger from taking over our lives? Because it can be very easy to get angry, in particular, like I mentioned, whether it's against awful things happening in the world, but also just in our day-to-day life, just being stressed or snapping at our partners or our work colleagues. And obviously, and I know this is and I've just discussed this before with people, is that there can be a little bit of a disconnect sometimes between, say, the activist circles and like the self-help, personal development movement, in that, sometimes the activists say, well, we have to be angry because this is bad, like what's going on in the world. It's, you know what I mean? So I guess is there kind of good anger and bad anger, but how do we prevent anger? And as you know, there's the trope of the angry black woman, for example. So what are your thoughts on that? Can you sort of unpack that a little bit?
I used to be her.
You used to be her. Oh.
But first off, I want to give all of my praise to activists. I love, love, love animal activists, social justice activists. They're out there in the streets doing really important work. But what I will say about anger is that anger absolutely always lies to you, and it serves no purpose. Anger doesn't hurt anyone except for yourself, right? So you may see some atrocity and it's outrageous. But the moment that you get angry, you're not helping the animals, or anyone else. You're actually harming yourself. So learning to process that initial feeling of disgust and outrage and pain away from the emotion of anger is helpful to you. It's helpful to your health. And it allows you to do more of the good work that you want to do. So
what do you say about, because I know I've heard a lot of activists say, no, anger motivate. If I didn't get angry, like if I was all just happy clappy and then I see these atrocities, I'm not going to be motivated to take action. Whereas because I've made angry, I'm fiery, then I'm motivated to take action. What are your thoughts on that? Because I hear that quite a bit. So I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, and I totally understand that. You absolutely can be motivated by anger. We all know that. But you can never make a good decision when you're angry. Even a boxer going into a ring, if he's really angry, he's going to throw the wrong punch. So it's not a place where you want to stay. I would encourage you to find something else that motivates you. Be motivated by your passion. Be motivated by your love for animals or for people. Be motivated by your joy. I know it sounds a little crazy when you're not accustomed to it because anger is so fiery. Yeah. But I think anybody listening, if they think about it, you know that you cannot make a good decision when you're angry.
Okay, fair enough. So tell us, tell us then, what is self-actualization and why is it important?
So self-actualization, if you've ever seen Maslow's need hierarchy, he's a psychologist, long gone now, but he came up with this theory around personal growth, which basically says, we start off with our basic needs being met, things like food, water, shelter. Then once those are taken care of, we progress to things like reputation. And as we go through these levels, the highest level of personal fulfillment is self-actualization. And self-actualization always includes some level of creativity. So it doesn't have to be, necessarily artists the way we may think of singers and dancers, but there's some level of creativity. And I would say that For those of the listeners here who have a belief in God or creator, I think it's very interesting that that highest level of deep joy and fulfillment is also creative, you know? But you may also look at it, like if that's not your particular belief system, you may also look at it as finding your purpose. You know, we talk a lot about, well, what's my purpose? What am I here for? So it's really finding that purpose, the passion towards it, and being able to step into that.
Nice. I love that. Now, I know you've got 12 steps in your fabulous new book, which you mentioned, 12 Steps to Mind-Blowing Happiness. Can you just talk us briefly, perhaps through the first 3 steps? Obviously, people can read the book for the others, but the first 3 steps to self-actualization or mind-blowing happiness, as you say, and I believe it begins with healing, spirituality, and community. Can you just give us a brief little...
So, I mean, clearly, you know, knowing my background, and I think even for any of us, we all need healing, and it's hard to move forward if we have an unhealed heart. So whether it's, you know, maybe your parents divorced, or your older sibling used to kick you around, or somebody stole your peanut butter sandwich, it could be something relatively small. Because even sometimes those small things, like I joke about the peanut butter sandwich, but you might never eat peanut butter again. You can actually change the trajectory of your life from something small. So whether it's something small like that you want to kind of tap into, or if it's larger traumas, you know, if you are a person of color feeling marginalized, women dealing with sexism, there's just so much, you know, to deal with out here. Besides from, you know, traumas, and, you know, most of us, by the time we get to 18, we've been through some things. So definitely the first step is seeking out healing. Do you want me to go into...
I think you mentioned spirituality, because I think that's a kind of an interesting one, because again, it can seem a bit woo-woo to some people. So it's kind of curious about, spirituality and community, a little bit about why they're important.
They're in order for a reason. So healing is first, because you really have to start from there. Make sure that you are okay. Spirituality is second for a reason. I grew up Catholic and probably rejected it at a certain point in my life. Went through a whole spiritual journey. I was atheist, I was Christian, you know, finally settled in a place that's very comfortable for me with Buddhism. But whether you subscribe to a religion, a formal religion or not, it's really important to understand that you are a spiritual being, that there is more to you than just this flesh and bones, and whether or not you look cute in your pants, or you know, that you really have this spiritual self, and then finding a way to nurture and support that spiritual self. So for some people, it might be through prayer. For some people, it might be through meditation, you know, but whatever it is, you know, I hike a lot. And for many of us, hiking is like a real spiritual journey, because you're connecting to nature and you can feel it. So yeah, it's not woo-woo. We are all spiritual, whether we realize it or not.
I love that. And community, the third one. Why is that important?
Yes. I mean, didn't we see during the pandemic how important it is to be connected to other people? We're not designed for isolation. And, you know, even if we circle back to talking about anger, many of the times when you see people committing horrific crimes and really angry people, they don't feel seen. You know, they don't feel understood, and they don't feel connected to other people. Now, there are lots of ways to get connected if you're not connected. We have the beauty now of the internet, where I can be talking to you and we're in different countries. But yeah, whether it's, you know, Facebook groups or family or spiritual groups. I love Meetup. I don't know if you guys use Meetup in Australia.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure.
The only rule that I have for connection is that I believe people need to connect on enlightened thought. So not in a gun club, you know, not at the barbecue, someplace where, you know, maybe you're reading books together or doing something that's positive together.
Any tips on healing fractured communities? Because we've seen a lot happen. Even I've seen, like, within vegan communities, you know, around, you know, people with differing viewpoints about what's going on and everything. And, you know, we've seen whole relationships, friendships just crumble because people have, even though they might have a common, you know, or many common things in place, such as, you know, being vegan or animal activism or what have you, but on certain topics they disagree. And any tips on how you can kind of handle that kind of division and perhaps try and heal those fractured relationships or communities when two people have quite opposing views on something?
Yeah, my first thought with that is, you know, obviously you have to have communication, whether you like it or not. I think a good place to start is with the idea that you're already wrong. If you both come in and you say, okay, I'm going to accept the fact that I'm wrong before we even get started, then you can play around with that gray area. I had a conversation not that long ago about racism. And I was talking to, you know, because I do work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I was talking to another diversity speaker. And she and I are both Black women. And we started off by saying, you know what, we're racist against ourselves because the institutions that we've been raised with as children has kind of created that construct. And it's kind of like, once I say that, then it's okay for other people to admit that they experience racism in their own heart. Because if I do, then it's okay, right? For you to say, well, you know what, Trish, how could I say I don't if you do? You know?
Right.
So I think, you know, maybe just a little something to level it, to make it okay to be wrong, or to make it okay to not know everything before you start a conversation.
I love that. I think that is such a great tip, and I haven't heard it put like that before. But I think that is, yeah, like you say, it just even as you said it, I could kind of like feel myself kind of calmed and think, yeah, I can see that that would be such a good place to come from, because you're not, because when you're both coming from I'm right, it's immediate conflict. Like it even makes me feel stressed, like, you know what I mean? It's that conflict. But when you kind of say, okay, I'm wrong, you're wrong, it's just that calm place to start from. So I really love that. Thank you for sharing that. Now, I noticed that you obviously self-love is important with a lot of these issues, and like you say, when you've experienced like what you have as a child, and we've, you know, experienced trauma, etc., or rejection, it can make you not love yourself, and that can have a whole host of issues. Now, I know that you've created a foundation for self-love that you call the Love Mob, MOB. So can you tell us a bit about that and any tips that you have on, because it sounds easy, like, oh, just love yourself. But, you know, when we've got those deep-seated messages, it can be quite tricky. So what is the Love Mob, and what are some tips for people to help to learn to truly love ourselves?
Yeah, self-love is tricky because sometimes people throw the word around and they don't really know what they're saying. So I always point out that you can't love yourself if you don't know yourself. So the first step is having some self-awareness. And then once you have that, then you can kind of walk in your
But what does
authentic.
that mean? Let me just push you there, Trish. What does that mean? Like, how do you know if you've got self-awareness? Like, do you see what I mean? What how would you know if you know yourself?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So, some of the exercises that I give to my clients are things like writing down 50 things you love about yourself. People usually struggle with that, but you can write small things like, you know, when you love someone else, and you might love really little things about them, like the curl at the end of their hair or the dimple in their cheek. So writing those things for yourself is one way. Also knowing what you like and what you don't like. Some of us haven't really found our voice or haven't tried enough things to know what we like and what we don't like. Some of those, you know, the exercises, of course, are in the book. But yeah, they take time. You know, you have to spend some time with yourself because you're not born knowing yourself. And people will tell you who you are if you don't figure out who you are. You know, your parents might tell you who you are, your spouse might tell you who you are, your kids, your boss, the media could tell you who you are, who they think you should be. And you have to take some time to ask yourself the right questions in order to be able to know, to be self-aware. It does take some effort.
Yeah.
But
So
I do
you
want to
become self-aware, and then how do we get into self-love?
yeah. So um, some of the ways to develop self-love is to set goals and, decide the things that you want to see in yourself. And if you don't know what you want to see in yourself, a good way of doing it is looking for other characters, icons. Maybe you see Oprah Winfrey. Why do you like her so much? What are the characteristics in her that you like, and what can you work towards? So whoever it is, I love Oprah, but whether it's
Me
Oprah
too.
or Tony Robbins or I'm trying to think of the girl with the vitamins, Alicia, who was a vitamin actress anyway. But what
Alicia Silverstone?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Your favorite vegan hero, whoever it is, write a list of people that you find amazing, and then why? Write the characteristics, and then work on building those values and those characteristics in yourself. And then you can step right into loving yourself in a true, authentic way, instead of just saying, I love myself, defensively sometimes, right?
And what's the love mob?
I was just going to say, I wanted to go back to that. So the love mob is kind of the foundation for self-love. So it starts off with our mother or our mother figures in our lives, because they're the first ones who really love us. And then the othering, or the others, are that sense of otherworldly love, whether we grew up with an idea of formal religion or God or some sort of spirituality that made us feel safe, like the world loves us. And the final piece, the brothers, of course, is your extended family, your community. Those are all of the things that create the foundation for self-love, for children coming up. Mm-hmm.
Right. And for people who perhaps don't have like a lot of family, for example, or are estranged for their family, would that be a case that they would need to find chosen family through friends and community?
Yeah. And absolutely.
Right.
Even if you, even as you get older, it's important to have friends who are younger, because you don't want to end up older and isolated. So you always have to, it's kind of like a garden. You always have to nourish your community.
Got it. I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'd love if you could just, because I know this is, a lot of people are struggling with this at the moment. Like people are there's the whole, I think it's called the Great Resignation. Like people are, with everything that's happened with COVID, people are not going back to their jobs, or they're not settling. Obviously, I mean, some people obviously have to. I'm aware that obviously there's a level of privilege if you can choose not to do certain work.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess for those people who perhaps are at work, they've got a job and they don't really like it that much, how can you bring passion to it while, doing what you need to do to kind of do what you enjoy? But in the meantime, if you do need to, work for a paycheck, which is, for a lot of people obviously necessary, but you don't really love it, how can you bring passion to it?
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to bring passion into work. You can take on a special project that maybe you might be interested, or create something and see if it will be accepted. You can start an organization or a club that meets some sort of need for you. It could be cupcake baking. It could be anything. I say that because I like cupcakes. But you could bring something new to the work. I remember when I was living in Brooklyn, there was a traffic cop who would be at the middle of this really busy intersection. And my goodness, what a stressful job. It's like, all of these taxis honking at you. And he would direct the traffic while doing this dance that just made it so joyful. So there are a lot of ways that you can bring joy to your work. You just have to take the time to think about it and be creative.
Awesome, thank you. So our final section is the rapid fire questions. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions, and you just answer in one sentence or less, unless you say something super, and I might say, oh, we'll give that an exception and unpack it. But otherwise, it's a little rapid fire section before we wrap up. What's the most courageous thing you've ever done?
Oh, zip line in Costa Rica, skydive.
Oh, wow. Skydive. Oh, wow. That is brave. Awesome. And what does leadership mean to you? And what style of leader do you believe you are?
I think leadership is surrounding yourself with people who are smarter than you.
Nice. That's an interesting definition. I like that. And what style of leader or kind of leader do you think you are?
What style of leader am I? I think inspirational. I lead by example.
Nice. Love it.
And
This is going to be an easy one for you. Sometimes some of my guests struggle with this, particularly women, but I think you're going to nail it. What do you love most about yourself?
I love my kind heart. That's what I'm going to go with.
I love that. I love that. What's one thing, and I know you've shared a lot, like, you know, on your website and publicly, but what's one thing most people don't know about you? So it could be anything. It could be an anecdote, something strange or funny that happened, or anything that just most people might not know about you.
I know I've shared so much. And I told you about the zip lining in Costa Rica. What's one thing? Oh, I paint.
Oh, I love that. I love that I asked this question because I know someone else I had on who's a very well-known animal activist in Australia, Lynn White, and I found out that, you know, she plays classical music, and I had no idea. So it's nice to find these little quirky extra things about people. So I love that. I love that. And finally, and I know you've shared quite a lot already, but anything, maybe one or two key lessons that you've learned about yourself, about life in general, any tips that you'd like to share with other vegan women leaders?
The hardest lesson for me to learn was surrender. So I used to always try to control everything. And if things didn't happen the way that I wanted them to happen, then I would try to make them happen. And it was not making me happy. So once I learned to surrender, and I still have my moments with surrender, but surrender is definitely a big tip. Learning to.
But that's an interesting one. I know I said this was rapid fire, but I would like to unpack that more, because can you explain to people, because sometimes when you think of surrender, like, you know, surrendering to what is, which I know is one of the, I think it's a Buddhist philosophy, it's probably a general spiritual philosophy, but sometimes that can feel like, well, what's the difference between surrender and accepting what is and just giving up and not having any ambition or not having any goals? Do you see what I mean? Can you just explain that?
So you absolutely do the work. You know, you can do all the work you need to do, but it's a little bit of a detachment from the outcome. Because at the end of the day, I can control what I'm doing, but I can't control the outcome. So I think that that's probably a good way to look at that.
How does it differ then? Because, you know, like if you manifest, for example, let's say you want something in particular, like, I don't know, say you're writing a book and you want it to be a New York Times #1 bestseller. So if you're, you know, the manifesting aspect would be, right, you manifest that, it's already happened, you can see it, it's happened. Mm-hmm. But so that's kind of an outcome, I guess. So how do you kind of balance that, like manifesting that and like seeing it, it's already happened, with surrendering and not being attached to an outcome?
I mean, you do both, because the reality is I manifest. I don't know if you manifest, but the things that I manifest, they don't just happen because I'm manifesting them, you know? So it's almost like when you go through those practices to manifest something, you have to, part of the manifestation is the surrender, that right. This is, you're kind of letting the universe know, this is what I want. But if you want something different that I can't see, I will accept that and accept it in gratitude.
Okay, yeah. Got it. That's a good differentiation, I think, because sometimes that can be a little bit confusing, like surrender to what is, but no, manifest what is. So I think you explained that beautifully. Well, look, it's been so lovely speaking with you, Trish. I'm so glad that I found you. And before we go, actually, tell us just very briefly about Black Vegan Life, and how does veganism play into your whole kind of self-help, personal development, and spirituality path?
Yeah, so spirituality actually brought me to veganism back in 2014. I started studying Buddhism in 2010, and I did a compassion retreat, and finally it clicked. Like, what am I doing here? I remember I would, you know, gather the little bugs. Like if a little fly came in my house, I'd take them outside in a cup, and then I would sit down to dinner. My dog would be at my feet. And then we would eat chicken, and it was, you know, something felt funny. And then I realized, you know, it just kind of all connected. The kind of hypocrisy of where I was living, and I was feeling it spiritually. And really, I was building up my compassion to make myself love myself more. And it led me to veganism. So.
I love that. I love that, because sometimes it's the other way around. Like, people become vegan and then they kind of become spiritual. I love that it was that way around. And Black Vegan Life, I believe, is a meetup group that you've got in Atlanta, Georgia, where you're based, and that there's a website and has resources as well, and we'll put that in the show notes page. Wonderful. Well, it's been amazing speaking with you. Everyone, do check out Trish's website, trishahjelroberts.com. If you're watching the video, that is scrolling along the bottom of your screen. And if you're listening to the audio version of this episode, that link will be in the show notes page. And also make sure you grab a copy of Trish's books. Her most recent one is 12 Steps to Mind-Blowing Happiness. Who wouldn't want a book like that? Who would not want to be able to have mind-blowing happiness? So make sure you grab a copy of that. It's been so lovely speaking with you, Trish. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for having me.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Bye for now.